Hi everybody, in this video we're going to learn all about how to customize a CSS animation. You have an animation, it looks great, runs really well, but did you know that you have the ability to make modifications to it, that you can actually adjust how it both runs and even how it appears? And in this video we're going to look at the various techniques we have to be able to pull that off. And so if you take a step back, a typical CSS animation is made up of two parts. The first part is what we like to call the animation sequence, and that is what we define with the animation property, where you have an element or elements of the animation property that specifies details about the animation itself, like what the keyframes to use to define its appearance, the duration, the timing function, the play mode, is it going to hold its value at the end of each iteration, and so on. This is really the setup for the animation itself. The actual appearance of the animation, what it does at any given point in time, that is defined by the add keyframes rule, and that is really known to define the actual appearance of our particular element at any given moment in time. So you kind of combine the animation property, which defines the animation sequence, and our add keyframes rule, which defines the actual appearance, and you have all the ingredients needed to make a killer CSS animation. And so in order to customize it, we're going to look at some of the things you can do here. Now, the best way to learn how to do this, the best way to understand what's going on, is to follow along with the steps and the things I'll be typing and explaining. But if you don't feel like doing that, just want to sit back and relax, that's totally cool as well. But if you do fall in the first category and be hands-on with all of this, go to bit.ly/customizing CSS animation, where we'll take a lot of the examples and look at it, in a more practical code form, as opposed to just looking at more slides. And so if you go to that URL, you'll see something that looks as follows. You'll see three circles, a green, yellow, and red circle, just happily sliding from left to right. Nothing too fancy going on there. And before we go into some of the details of modifying this animation, let's just take a status of what exactly our example looks like. So right now in HTML, you can see that there is a div element with ID value of container. That is the dotted line you see around it. And then you see three div elements with the ID values of circle 1, circle 2, and circle 3. These correspond to the three circles that we have here, and they all share a common class value of circle. So the real interesting things are really happening in the CSS, where you have the container style, nothing too interesting there, but when you go to the circle style rule for the class element that all these circles share, you can now see that we have our animation declaration. You can see that we have the animation keyframes to slide, it runs for 2 seconds, the timing function is this really long cubic Bezier curve, and then it runs forever, which is really the infinite loop that we have specified as infinite right here. And then you can see the color of each circle from our hashtag circle 1, circle 2, circle 3 is defined to give it that look. And the actual keyframe itself, the slide keyframe, you can see that we have 0, 50, and 100%. We're just translating its appearance from 0 pixels to 400 to back. So it starts at 0, goes to 400, and it comes back. And all the elements are sharing this particular same keyframe, which is why all the circles are moving in unison. So that's our animation as it is right now. Now, let's say we want to make a modification to it. And so one of the things that is very common that you'd want to do is make a modification to the actual, the sequence of the animation itself, the things defined in the animation property. Now, one way you can do that, of course, is by modifying it here. Let's say I want to change the duration from like 2 seconds to 1 second. And if I did that, well, that is not what I want to do yet. Notice that when I do that, you can see that all my circles now automatically inherit this value. They're all going really, really quickly. Now, if I want to personalize it for each of these circles, all I can do is, we have 3 style rules, circle 1, circle 2, circle 3, that correspond to each circle. And in terms of CSS specificity and which rule will win out, any modification I make here will apply uniquely to that particular element. So let's say I'm going to specify here an animation duration for this element of, let's say, just 1 second, which is what it is right now. I'm going to specify an animation duration of 5 seconds for this one, for the second one. You can see that I'm specifying animation duration, 5 seconds, and you can now see that this circle is going to be moving much, much slowly as for the others. And similarly, animation duration, 3 seconds. Pretty straightforward. And now you can see that each of the circles is now moving at its own happy little pace without while still sharing the same keyframe animation. So that's a pretty interesting detail to note here. We haven't modified the animation appearance itself. All we do is modify some of the details about how it is running, which in this case is just a duration. And by specifying each element, we're able to do a lot of things there. Now we can go further. I can also specify a different timing function on each one. I'm not going to do that because you kind of get the gist of it at this point. You can see that by specifying each of these properties that have already been defined generally across all of them, I can override them on each element and be able to go further. Now here's an interesting thing though, right? We have the actual animation sequence we modified, but what about the appearance of the animation itself? Like, we have each of these elements that are moving from 0 to 400 to 0. Is there a way for us to be able to modify the values for them so that each of them gets their own particular value as well? Because notice that there's one slide keyframes rule that's applying to all three elements. Now, one approach is that I duplicate the slide rule. I basically create another version, call it, say, slide 2, and then I go ahead and go into each element and specify the animation name of slide 2 and have that override default animation. That is one approach, but that is not the approach I want to recommend right now, especially if our goal is to modify, in this case, some of the values that their default keyframes are already pulling off. So what I'm going to do is actually change it so that I'm going to use a custom property. I'm going to go ahead and go into each of my elements and specify a new property called endX, which is going to be the ending horizontal position of our element. So I'm going to set the endX value for circle 1 to be 200 pixels. And in circle 2, I'm going to specify an endX value of 300 pixels. And similarly, I'm going to go to circle 3 and specify an endX value of 100 pixel. And that's going to be basically going from 0 to 100. So nothing going on there. Now all I've really defined though is just the actual keyframes, custom CSS custom property for where the animation is going to end. What I haven't done is actually specified how it's actually going to be applied to the animation itself. And that really goes into actually applying it in the keyframes rule itself. And so here, where it has translate x 400 pixel, I'm going to use the custom property syntax and say var //end x with a fallback value of 400 pixels. So if for whatever reason index isn't specified, use this fallback value. And once I've specified this, notice what you see here. Each of our 3 circles is now respecting the new values we specified for when it's going to be ending. The first one goes about halfway and comes back. The second one goes up to the almost 3/4 of the way and then comes back. And the last one only moves 100 pixels. So you can see that it's actually going back and forth very quickly. Just for kicks, if I change it from 3 seconds to 0.5 seconds, you can see it oscillating back and forth very, very quickly. Almost like it's like you can now see each of them having their own quirky behavior, which is kind of really cool. And so what we saw here were really 2 ways for being able to customize the appearance of our CSS animation. One is by basically modifying the animation property values themselves to just a sequence of how our animation runs. And the last one was by actually using custom properties to change the values that our keyframes would actually be listening for, which is a pretty powerful way to make modifications to our animation, especially after it has started running. And so with that, you might be wondering what makes it so fascinating, how often you'll be able to do this. Now, for many cases, especially in UIs where you have an animation applying to many elements on the screen, there will be times when you don't want to recreate an animation. You want to have a consistent library of animations that you use, but you have some way of parameterizing them, some way of modifying them. And these 2 techniques will take you pretty far in customizing what CSS animations can do. Now, this doesn't go too far though. If you want to truly be able to have customizable animations, my video on when to use a CSS animation versus a transition versus an animation in JavaScript goes into more detail. But if you want full customizability, you really want to create your own animation in JavaScript using either request animation frame and adjusting the position yourself, or using the animate method and be able to specify in a JavaScript format a rough approximation of how keyframes will work. And with that, if you have any questions about this topic or any other web development topic, go to forum.group.com, where I and others would be pretty happy to help you out. If you like this, tell your friends and enemies all about it, and subscribe. Follow me at Krupa to be notified of small bite-sized updates on things that I create that are web development related usually. And lastly, if you enjoyed watching a video form of this, there's a book form of all my content as well. So by my book, Creating Web Animations, which is really about animations and some of these topics like this, but I write books on other topics as well. Links at the bottom, check it out. And then some of the related videos you'll see kind of cover in more detail how to customize an animation beyond what we've seen here. And with that, I will see you all next time.